Hello and welcome back to Cancun, Mexico. This is the United Nations Climate Talks and you're watching OneClimate.net, broadcasting with our partners Tick Tick Tick. Today we've got a packed show for you and we're going to be focusing on the issue of gender and climate change, following some requests from our viewers. And I'm delighted to say that we've been joined by Gotelind Alber, and you're the founder of Gender CC. Who are one of the big campaigning groups here. So we're going to talk to you a little bit about women's role in these talks and about how you got interested in this subject. So welcome to the show. And I should also say welcome back to Zaina, who's presenting the show alongside me this week. Gotelind, my first question, and this is my first question to a lot of our participants, why are you interested in climate change? What got you enthused about this subject?
My background is energy, so I'm a physicist, and I started to work on energy, sustainable energy issues. And since I'm a little bit older than you, this is already quite some time ago. And as the climate change debate came up, it was clear that anyone who wanted to advance sustainable energy also needed to work on climate change. And now it has become the overarching issue. I'm pretty much working on energy issues as well.
And so what's Gender CC do? What's the organisation do?
So we're a network of women's organisations and also gender experts and gender activists. So it's both women and gender. Okay. So because the activists are we're mainly women, but we have some men, and well, we're working on gender issues specifically in the climate debate, and since we see, well, the gender roles as social roles, but also, let's say, power relations, we think that it's, well, in particular we need to emphasize the role of women, because this is usually neglected in decision making, and in particular in this process. Okay. Much more than in any other of the Rio processes. This process has been completely gender blind for quite a while.
Gotelind, you were telling me earlier about how gender issues came into the climate change debate. So how long have you been present at conferences like this? Has gender always been talked about in such conferences?
No, in the climate discussion, no. So personally, I have been involved in the climate negotiations since the beginning. But I have been working for cities in climate change, and also I supported indigenous peoples. But I was always interested in gender issues as well, but only with the help of some other women and some networking, we managed to really introduce this in the discussion and find allies in this process. That was about 7 or 8 years ago that we started at a very small scale networking with individual events during the negotiations, and since then the networking and in particular our network emerged and evolved, and since 2 years we're a real organization, of also formalized non-profit organization, and now we have so we're based in Germany, but we're a global network, so we have focal points in all world regions.
But why do you feel that women need special representation at these talks? For a lot of our viewers, they might not understand that this is about climate change, this is just a global issue, and it's about science. Why do you feel women need special representation here?
Well, first of all, they are actually underrepresented. So if you look at delegates, about 30% only are women, and if you look at heads of delegations, it's even less, so it's even like 50% or so. There are very few women's organizations in this process. I think it's partly because it's very much about technical issues, but I think it's in the character of this discussion that it has, well, mainly focused on natural science and not so much on people. And so I think we're one of the agents to bring people in this process together, for instance, with development organizations who also have much more emphasized the human aspect of climate change.
Later on in the show, we're going to have lots of women come on and tell us more about the impacts of climate change and how it's affecting women on the ground. But maybe from you, because you were involved in starting up this women's constituency and being the focal point for these women's organizations that came together. Maybe you could tell us a bit about how these organizations came together and why.
Well, why is because we felt that not only women but also women's perspective are underrepresented in this process, and so we started with the small events I've mentioned. This was in particular live, a German organization, and Energia, a global network on energy, and some others. And so we started to look at the issues that are at stake and try to raise awareness on the gender dimension of these issues. And the first of it, of course, was adaptation, because for most people it's easier to understand that women are more vulnerable due to their, let's say, traditional role, the division of labor in the family, and also lower income. So there are various factors that make it quite evident that women are more vulnerable. But the next step is to show that women have an important role in adaptation and also in mitigation. And this is actually at this moment one of my main focal areas to work on women and gender and mitigation.
And you mentioned there that women have a big role in adaptation and mitigation, and you've said they're underrepresented in these talks. Do you think that affects the tone of the talks and the way that these negotiations are proceeding? Would it be different if there were more women here? Would we be closer to some kind of compromise, do you think, or is that impossible to say?
I hope it would be different because it's not. There's no guarantee. Mm-hmm. There's no guarantee because I know it from the science that if more women are involved, they feel the need to adapt, to the discussion culture and so on. And so it's the same, of course, in such a discussion. And therefore, it's important that we are getting more than. If we are more, we can really make a difference, and this is why the various groups that have been involved in this process then 2 years ago started to say we need to get our own constituency. Constituency here in this process is an own grouping of observer organizations that has more visibility and more options to interact with the process. So we have our own interventions and our own slots for consultations and so on, and so.
So who do you have consultations with? What have you been doing the last few days?
For instance, with the COP presidency, with the chairs. So if we want to consult with individual delegations, that is something we have to organize. But as for consultations with chairs or with the executive secretary, that is something the secretariat organizes for us, and we have also guaranteed slots for interventions, if interventions are possible due to time constraints.
So who have you been talking to the last few days? Who have you had interesting discussions with?
I have been very much involved in this constituency work because I'm the focal point, so I must admit I have maybe more talk with other constituencies than with anyone else, but also with for instance, we hopefully will have a special constituency meeting with the COP presidency. We had a meeting with the chair of SBI because there is just a current discussion, ongoing discussion on stakeholder participation, and of course this is something that is also very important for us, whether there will be better options to interact.
And as the talks stand at the moment, the negotiating texts that exist and the policies that exist, how do you think women will be impacted? Are they taken into account sufficiently, or are some of the solutions going to affect women disproportionately, or are some women's issues kind of not sufficiently addressed? Is the UN doing a good job on this front or not?
Well, the UN doesn't do the job, it's the parties, of course, who are writing the text. So when we look at the text, I think we have really made progress because we started from zero, and we have quite a number of gender references in the text. So we had something in the shared vision about human rights and also women's rights and stakeholder involvement. There is something on gender-sensitive adaptation. So there are some references that might be helpful, in particular when it then comes later on to implementation, but we're still lacking of any gender references in mitigation and in finance. And so we're currently working a lot on finance because this is the big issue here, and so we think it's really crucial that they get aware of gender, and that they get aware of women's needs. For instance, one of the expectations we have and the demands we have is that these funds that are going to be created, that there is a direct access possibility for groups, women's groups or other groups from the ground.
It seems peculiar that they haven't kind of acknowledged women's role in finance, because other kind of big global governance institutions like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund seem finally, after decades of ignoring the importance of gender, to have acknowledged, or they, at least it seemed to have acknowledged, how critical women are in terms of the distribution of finance. Yeah. Why do you think that hasn't kind of
if
reached
there are
here?
no provisions in the fundamental documents, then the banks or agency won't do it. So you can see this with Jeff. So they have
Jeff is the global
the Global Environmental Fund who manages the main funds that are currently in place in the climate policy, and they're managing also the biodiversity funding and other funds like for desertification. And since these other conventions, they refer to gender and women, so then there is also a gender policy within the GEF, but with climate change, no. And I think this is really something we need to work on a lot.
And just finally, you said it's not the UN that does the job, and of course it's true. It's the parties, the countries here. But we have a new executive secretary, or at least she's been here since is it June now, in Cristiana Figueres. Do you think it has made a difference having kind of a woman at the top of these talks as the executive secretary of the UN, or is it irrelevant? Because she's a formidable character. We've spoken to her a few times, and she's a really inspiring character. Do you think that impacts anything?
Hopefully. So I think she's really open to and she has personal experience of working with women. So I think this will be helpful. But I must say that her predecessor, Ivo, I think he learned a lot. And so finally, before he left in June, he said. So I asked him, do you think we can get any further with gender issues? And he said, you've done so much in terms of awareness raising the women's groups that he would think there is much more leeway for us and much more potential to get more entries.
Well, it's a hopeful message to finish on. I have to admit, I've saved my hardest question till last. We've been going around the talks the last couple of days and asking people to describe this process, the UN climate talks, in one word, using one adjective. And we've got a short video that we're going to show our viewers now of the various answers we've had to that question. But if you had to describe the UN climate talks in one word, what adjective do you think you'd use?
I would just say long.
I think that's
which has also to do with longing for something.
It's a nice, it's a sentiment that we've heard before. Okay, I'll ask Jamie, our tech man, to cue up that video. And Gotelind, thank you very much for joining us. It was really interesting to speak to you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the great work you're doing.